transport vessel hummed to a stop, its landing thrusters kicking up shimmering ice crystals as it touched down on the surface of X-99. A thin, translucent haze covered the sky, casting a blue tint over the jagged ice plains that stretched beyond the horizon. The moon's atmosphere was breathable but thin, and the temperature sat at a bone-cracking 80 DGC. For most species, exposure to such cold even for a few minutes could lead to irreversible tissue damage. That, of course, was the whole point. Zarthus 9 was known throughout the Galactic Academy as one of the most brutal environments used for testing physical and psychological resilience. Each year, top-performing cadets were chosen to participate in the Academy's elite survival module known as Frozen Labyrinth Protocol. Only those who completed the challenge earned access to high-level interstellar field operations. Among the 22 students who exited the vessel, each in a different shape and shade, towered and clustered in groups of their own kind, only one stood out in both appearance and posture. Lucas Grant was the only human in this year's cohort. While others stumbled out in bulky, full-body insulated suits with embedded auto-heaters and biometric patches, Lucas stepped down the loading ramp with ease, wearing what looked like a standard-issue thermal hoodie and reinforced pants. A pair of insulated gloves tucked neatly into his waistband. A single metallic case hung by his side, which he handled with more care than his own safety gear. He squinted at the horizon, eyes adjusting to the blinding reflection of light bouncing off miles of mirrored ice, and let out a calm exhale that formed a perfect white ring in the freezing air. Some students turned to look at him with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. A Serenian female, dressed in a tri-layered thermosuit with a tail-warming module, nudged her partner and gestured toward Lucas with a click of her inner jaw. "Does he think this is a tourist expedition?" she muttered under her breath, voice filtered through her visor. Her companion, a tall, bird-like Croxian with an impressive wingspan tucked beneath his armor, tilted his head but said nothing. Lucas, unfazed by the attention, stepped away from the group and knelt on one knee, carefully placing the metallic case on the ice. He ran a gloved hand over its surface and checked the latches, making sure the temperature seal was intact. The case made a faint click as it locked into standby mode. He straightened up and looked ahead at the colossal structure that loomed in the distance, a twisting, glowing wall of crystallized ice stretching 20 meters high. It was the maze, and it was alive. The labyrinth of Zarthus 9 was no static structure. It shifted every hour, responding to internal geothermal activity and microgravitational pulses, ensuring that no path remained the same for long. Every route could change at any moment. Mapping drones had limited effectiveness as the ice fields refracted sensor waves. The Academy designed the maze to test instinct, adaptability, and survival under pressure, especially under the looming threat of hypothermia and disorientation. Getting lost wasn't just inconvenient, it could be fatal. A holographic figure flickered to life above the group, shimmering into view like a frozen ghost. It was Professor Jex, a multi-limbed Tallarite and one of the Academy's most respected field instructors. He hovered in his projection, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Students," he began in a clipped tone, "welcome to your final test. You have exactly 3 hours to navigate the ice maze and reach the thermal beacon at its core. You may use whatever non-weaponized tools you brought with you. Those who fail to complete the challenge within the time limit will be disqualified. Those who collapse or become immobilized will be rescued, but you will forfeit your position in the elite squadron list. Are there any questions?" No one raised a hand. The silence was absolute. "Very well," the professor continued. "Your suit monitors will track your vitals. Attempting to bypass the walls using vertical ascent will result in disqualification. The challenge begins in 30 minutes. Prepare accordingly." With a final flicker, the hologram vanished. Immediately, the alien students split into clusters, reviewing data maps, activating drones, applying supplementary heating gels, and running suit diagnostics. The Saranians tested the adhesion levels of their clawed boots. The Croxians adjusted their thermal feathers, fluffing them up with concentrated bursts of body heat. One Drask female even began chewing on a glucose cube to elevate her internal energy levels. No one noticed Lucas walking away from the gathering entirely. He moved to the edge of the drop zone and sat on a solitary chunk of ice. From his metallic case, he pulled out a small bottle of water and a compact protein bar. He ate slowly, eyes never leaving the massive maze in the distance. After finishing his meal, he unzipped his case and revealed what was inside. 2 sleek, curved blades gleamed in the dim sunlight. Blades sharpened to precision, custom-made from heat-treated carbon steel with magnetic mounts and stabilizers along the inner arches. Ice skates, but far beyond anything seen on Earth's frozen lakes. Lucas had designed them during his final year at the Academy, inspired by ancient Terran winter sports and tailored for use on alien terrain. He had tested them in silence, away from others, learning how to glide over every kind of frozen surface. Zarthus 9 would be his proving ground. When the announcement came, challenge begins in 5 minutes. Lucas stood, secured the skates to his boots using magnetic clamps, and walked to the edge of the starting line. Other students noticed him now. Some snickered, one even pointed. Professor Jex's assistant, a robotic drone named Vera 3, hovered beside him and beeped twice. Student Lucas Grant, your current footwear does not meet standard tread criteria for this environment. Recommend reevaluation. Lucas glanced at the drone and smiled. They'll do just fine. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. He flexed his legs, rolling his ankles slightly to feel the blade response. 3, 2, 1. The siren blared. The maze shimmered, its crystalline walls shifting as it activated. Students rushed forward, most moving cautiously. Their boots crunched into the ice with heavy precision, some already scanning their surroundings for movement. A few got disoriented at the first turn. The cold sank in like a living thing, biting through their suits as the wind picked up speed. Lucas didn't rush. He waited 5 seconds, then took his first stride forward. Long, smooth, effortless. The blades kissed the ice. He pushed off again, faster this time. His posture leaned forward, arms out for balance. Within moments he was gone, gliding into the maze with a grace that was as unexpected as it was uncatchable. Behind him, the others trudged on, unaware that someone had just turned the deadliest survival test in the galaxy into a joyride. The wind sliced through the crystalline passages of the maze, howling between the narrow corridors like a chorus of ancient whispers. Walls of ice shimmered in spectral hues, reflecting and refracting light into blinding prisms. The ground beneath was treacherously smooth in places, jagged in others, and cracked with invisible fissures that could swallow an unwary foot. With every shifting pulse from the moon's core, the maze morphed. Corners elongated, dead ends collapsed, and entire walls realigned with a deep, resonant groan. Navigation wasn't just about direction. It was about timing, intuition, and staying ahead of the rhythm of the shifting structure. Lucas pushed forward without hesitation. His skates sliced through the icy terrain with a quiet hum, each movement fluid and deliberate. He leaned into the curves, allowing momentum to carry him through narrow paths that would have required others to slow to a crawl. His breath came out in steady puffs, fogging in the cold, but his face remained calm. He could feel the vibration in the ice, a distant thrum that warned him when a section was about to change. That rhythm became his guide. He made a sharp turn to the right and ducked under a low-hanging ice arch that cracked behind him the moment his weight passed beneath it. A second too late and he would have been sealed in. He didn't look back. Instead, he focused on the way the frost curled along the base of the walls, the subtle rise in temperature that hinted at geothermal veins running below the surface, and the faint sound of dripping water from a recently melted overhang. Every detail mattered. Every sound told a story. Meanwhile, deep within the maze, the others were struggling. A Sorenian female named Valera trudged through a corridor that narrowed with every step. Her suit's heat module beeped with increasing urgency, warning her that the external temperature had dipped below survivable thresholds. Frost crept along her visor. Her sharp claws scraped against the ice, but the surface offered no grip. She reached into her belt and deployed a thermal anchor, a compact device that shot out hooks and embedded itself into the wall, holding her steady. As she caught her breath, she glanced down at the digital map on her wrist. The path she had taken just moments ago was gone, replaced by a new configuration. Panic flared in her chest, but she forced it down. This was the price of becoming elite. Further north, a Croxian male named Halrex spread his wings slightly for balance, his talons clicking against the slick surface. His feathers were coated with ice, stiffening his joints. He tried to leap onto a ledge for a better vantage point, but a sudden tremor shifted the wall before him and he crashed shoulder first into it. Sparks flew from his equipment pack. He roared in frustration, the sound echoing off the maze walls with hollow emptiness. His pride had always been his strength, but pride couldn't thaw frozen wings. Across the network of corridors, a Drask named Imari was on her hands and knees. Her suit had suffered a minor tear during a tight squeeze through a gap, and her internal temperature had dropped dangerously low. She had used a temporary patch, but her movements had become sluggish. She crawled toward a faint light she had seen flickering ahead, desperation overpowering logic. She didn't realize it was just a natural reflection off a curved wall until she reached it. Her scream was swallowed by the ice. Above all of this, in the command center perched on a floating satellite platform orbiting Zarthus 9, Professor Jex watched in silence. The holographic feed displayed every student's vitals, positions, and movement speeds. Most were slowing. Several were lost. 2 had already triggered emergency beacons and been removed from the trial. Jex noticed one dot moving rapidly through the maze at speeds 10 times higher than the others. "Subject Grant," he murmured, adjusting the view to follow the human's progress. Lucas darted down a sloping corridor, turning sharply as the floor tilted under his feet. He didn't fight it, he embraced it. With a practiced twist, he shifted his weight to his left side, letting the slope carry him faster. When a wall ahead began to close, he dropped to one knee, extended his arm for balance, and slid beneath the gap just as it sealed shut behind him with a thunderous slam. The force of his motion sent a thin mist of frost billowing behind him like a wake. His eyes scanned for markers. The Academy had placed subtle thermal indicators throughout the maze, impossible to see unless one knew how to read the signs. Lucas recognized a barely perceptible shimmer in the upper layers of a stalactite cluster. He took a detour to the left, ignoring the main path, and ducked through an unassuming tunnel that curved downward. It was dark, narrow, and coated with a slick sheen, but it was also a shortcut. He knew it instinctively. Minutes later, he emerged into a wide chamber bathed in ethereal blue light. The ground here was uneven, the ice ridged like waves frozen mid-Mamer. Navigating it required rapid footwork and control. Lucas kicked off with force, zigzagging across the frozen ripples with incredible precision. He reached the far end just as another tremor rolled through the maze. A section of ceiling collapsed behind him, timing again. He had no idea how close the others were. He didn't care. This wasn't a race against them. It was a race against the maze itself. He stopped briefly to check his position. The air here was warmer, a faint mist curling at the corners of the tunnel ahead. That meant he was getting close to the geothermal core, the heart of the labyrinth. From there, it would only be a matter of 2 or 3 correct turns. Suddenly, a distant voice crackled through the emergency band. "This is Cadet Valera," the voice said, labored and strained. "Trapped. Minimal heat. Coordinates unknown." Lucas exhaled. The signal wasn't directed at him. Rescue drones would get to her eventually. But he knew how that eventually worked. The drones moved slow in unstable sections. If she was losing heat, she wouldn't last. He looked back down the corridor he had come from. It would cost him precious minutes, maybe even the chance to finish. He pulled out his beacon, tapped the edge twice, and set it to signal delay. It would hold his position in the system. Then, without another thought, he turned back and kicked off, speeding into the maze in reverse. Navigating backward through a living structure was suicidal, but Lucas had already memorized his path. He knew where the walls would shift, how the ice bent under stress, and when the tremors came in waves. He skated faster now, calculating the tremor cycles in his head. The wind tore at his face, and the cold burned his throat, but his focus never wavered. He found Valera wedged between 2 walls that had closed in on her location. She had managed to wedge her thermal anchor in just enough to prevent a full collapse. Her visor was fogged, and her hands were stiff with frostbite. When she saw Lucas slide into view, she blinked in confusion. "You," she muttered. "You're still in the trial?" Lucas said nothing. He pulled a collapsible pick from his belt and wedged it into the corner of the frozen wall. With a grunt, he pried the seam open just enough to pull her free. She collapsed against him, unable to stand. "Hold on," he said. He locked her arms over his shoulders, crouched and shifted his weight. He kicked forward. The added weight slowed him, but not enough to stop him. He carved through the maze, taking the longer path toward a known rescue zone marked in the training manual. It would delay his run, but it would save her life. When he finally reached the beacon zone, he activated the rescue signal and laid Valera down beside a thermal flare. A drone picked up the signal and began approach. Lucas stood silently for a second, catching his breath. Then he turned away and launched himself back into the maze. There was still time, and he wasn't done skating yet. Lucas pushed off from the rescue zone, muscles burning under the weight of exertion, but his mind was focused. The delay had cost him nearly 18 minutes. He had used it to save a life, yes, but now the clock pressed against his shoulders like the gravity of a dying star. The geothermal pulse under the ice was shifting again. He could feel it in the vibration of his skates, in the subtle hum that rippled up through his bones. The maze was preparing to change once more. If he didn't get ahead of it now, entire sections could collapse or rearrange in ways that made forward progress almost impossible. He narrowed his eyes and leaned into his next stride, gliding over a stretch of smooth, glassy ice that curved downward in a steep arc. His blades cut into the surface with effortless grace, sparks of frozen mist rising behind him. He banked hard to the left, kicked off the wall for momentum, and launched down a narrow tunnel that flickered with blue static. This was a risk. Static meant electromagnetic interference, signs of a coming transformation in the maze's architecture. He shot forward, vision flickering for a moment as the static danced across his visor. Then, everything stilled. The tunnel exploded open into a circular chamber with 5 exits. Each exit was identical, angular, jagged, and veiled in white frost. Lucas knew only one of them would lead to the geothermal core. The others were misdirections, possibly traps. He crouched low and pulled out a thermal card from his jacket, an old Terran heat sheet, basic but reliable. He bent it between his fingers and waited. The heat-sensitive material darkened slightly in one direction, revealing a subtle temperature gradient. "Northwest," he whispered. He flipped the card back into his pocket and took the northwest corridor. As he picked up speed, a deep tremor ran through the ice, and the walls of the chamber behind him began to shift violently. One of the false paths collapsed entirely, sealing shut with a thunderous crack. He hadn't been a second too soon. This corridor was narrower, and the ice had roughened, no longer the smooth plains he had danced across before. Here it was fractured and uneven, full of jagged ridges and unpredictable patterns. He adjusted his technique, lifting his blade slightly and using the edges of his skates for traction instead of speed. Every few meters he had to hop or spin to maintain momentum. The corridor eventually opened into a series of switchbacks, winding paths that curled around massive crystal pillars rising from the frozen floor like ancient columns. The temperature here was rising, not enough to be comfortable, but enough that a mist was forming along the edges, creating a thin layer of fog. Visibility dropped. Lucas slowed only slightly, relying now on instinct and memory rather than sight. His breaths were sharp, precise. His body had adapted to the cold, his lungs used to the thin air, his heart beating in a steady, controlled rhythm. A sudden clang echoed through the fog ahead, metal against ice. He reacted immediately, dropping low and veering to the side just in time to avoid a collapsing archway. A sharp piece of ice struck his shoulder as it fell, and he grunted in pain, but didn't stop. He used the force of the blow to spin himself into a sideways drift, then realigned and kept moving. The fog thickened as he advanced. Somewhere deep ahead the air shifted again. He saw a flicker. Gold this time. The geothermal core had to be near. He pressed forward, increasing speed, arms tucked tightly against his sides. The path narrowed once more, almost into a tunnel, and the ice beneath him began to ripple like thin glass under pressure. He had no choice but to continue. The tunnel spat him out into a massive cavern that took his breath away. The ceiling sparkled with radiant veins of golden ore and trapped steam. In the center stood the beacon, a tall crystalline structure glowing with internal heat, its color a steady amber. Around it was a circular platform covered in thick, bumpy frost. It was not a smooth entry. The maze had not made this easy. Lucas accelerated, aiming for the far left where the frost seemed slightly thinner. As he approached the final stretch, a deep roar echoed from beneath the platform. The ice around the beacon cracked violently and a fissure split open ahead of him, forcing him to leap sideways. He landed on his right skate, twisted hard and caught his balance just inches from the edge. The beacon pulsed. He was here. Lucas reached into his coat and pulled out his identification chip. He stepped onto the platform, pushed the chip into the slot at the base of the beacon, and waited. A flash of light enveloped him, scanning his vitals, his gear, and his timestamp. "Candidate Lucas Grant," a voice intoned from the beacon. "Arrival confirmed. Completion time 2 hours, 18 minutes, 41 seconds. Challenge cleared." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting his breath settle. Then he knelt, touched the ice, and smiled. It wasn't about being first. It wasn't even about recognition. It was about proving something. To himself, to the galaxy, to the ones who always thought humans were too soft, too fragile, too wild. The calm didn't last long. The beacon trembled again, and Lucas turned instinctively. One of the remaining corridors behind him lit up with emergency red. Through the fog, a figure stumbled forward. It was Halrex, limping, his feathers soaked in frost, blood staining one side of his armor. He collapsed a few meters from the platform. Lucas didn't hesitate. He skated back, scooped the Croxian's arm over his shoulder, and pulled him forward. The platform, recognizing both signatures, adjusted to accommodate. A second scan triggered. Emergency override protocols began to warm the air around them. Halrex coughed and looked at him, confusion flickering across his reptilian face. "Why did you—" "Wait," Lucas shook his head. "Didn't wait, just never left." The Croxian grunted, maybe a laugh, maybe pain, and slumped back as the warming pod sealed them both inside. Far above, Professor Jex stood silently in the command center, arms crossed as he watched the feed. Behind him, other instructors murmured among themselves. Only one student had reached the beacon on his own. Only one had completed the test and returned twice to help others. Jex tapped the console, enlarging the image of Lucas resting beside the beacon, his breath still fogging the air, his face still unreadable. "No ceremony," Jex said. "No medals. Just put his name at the top." The warmth inside the recovery pod spread slowly, seeping into every layer of Lucas's clothing, curling around his skin like a gentle mist. He didn't move. He sat cross-legged on the floor, his skates still on, the buckles frosted over but intact. Across from him, Halrex remained unconscious, his taloned limbs twitching as the pod's med system scanned his injuries. A pulse of orange light swept across the Croxian's body, injecting stabilizers and anti-shock compounds into his bloodstream. The hum of the beacon filled the space, rhythmic and low, like a heartbeat forged in crystal. Lucas leaned back against the smooth wall of the pod and let his eyes drift shut for a moment. His muscles ached, especially his shoulders, but it was the sharp pain along his ribs that made him wince. That leap across the fissure had come with a price. He'd landed harder than he realized. He pressed his palm against his side and took a deep breath, letting the pressure ease the strain. The scan would pick it up eventually. For now, he was still inside the challenge zone, and he preferred silence to the swarm of medical drones. He didn't know how long he sat like that before the pod's wall shimmered. The surface blurred, then cleared, forming a transparent view of the ice chamber beyond. A figure stood just outside the perimeter. Professor Jex, arms folded, his expression unreadable. The moment Lucas's gaze met his, the Tallarite tapped the console beside him, and the pod's door disengaged with a soft hiss. The cold rushed in again, biting at Lucas's skin. He stood up slowly, careful not to disturb Halrex, and stepped out onto the ice. The beacon pulsed behind him, casting a soft golden glow across the frost-covered chamber. "Candidate Grant," Jex said without greeting. "Report." Lucas met his eyes. 2 injuries, 1 Croxian recovered. 1 human, fractured rib, mild fatigue. "Time of completion?" Jex asked. 2 hours, 18 minutes, 41 seconds, Lucas answered. "With interruptions." The professor's gaze didn't shift. "You returned for 2 separate cadets?" Lucas nodded once. "Yes." "Why?" Lucas looked past him for a moment, watching as rescue drones darted through one of the other corridors, carrying a stretcher. A Serenian female lay motionless on it, frost forming a delicate crown around her temple. He exhaled and brought his eyes back to Jex. "Because I could." Jex didn't speak for a long time. The silence stretched between them like a thread pulled tight. Then, finally, he turned and began walking toward the corridor that led back to the extraction point. "Follow me." Lucas obeyed without question, his skates clicking softly against the ice as he followed. The corridor they entered was different, smooth, straight, and unchanging. This was not part of the trial. This was the staff corridor, reserved only for instructors and those who had completed the maze. The temperature rose gradually as they walked, until the air no longer burned to breathe and the light began to shift from cold blue to warm amber. They reached a decontamination chamber, and Jex waved a hand across the panel. A thin mist washed over Lucas, removing surface frost and adjusting his core temperature. His blades disengaged with a mechanical hiss, detaching from his boots as the floor recognized his completion status. He stepped barefoot onto the heated tile and finally allowed himself a proper breath. Beyond the decontamination zone was a small observation deck that overlooked the outer rim of the maze. From here, Lucas could see the entire frozen expanse, the shimmer of cracked crystal, the deep caverns filled with fog, and the faint glow of the beacon still pulsing at the center. Around the perimeter, transport ships hovered in preparation for evacuation. Jex stepped beside him, his arms folded again. No one else reached the beacon, not even close. Lucas didn't respond. "You were expected to fail, you know," Jex continued. "Humans have a reputation. Wild, emotional, unpredictable. I only accepted your enrollment because the board insisted on diversity this cycle." Lucas raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He had heard worse. "But now," the professor said, narrowing his eyes slightly, "I have a different problem." Lucas turned to face him. "Which is?" Jex gestured toward the frozen wasteland. "You didn't just pass. You rewrote the test. You didn't rely on tech. You didn't wait for permission. You adapted. You moved with the maze instead of against it. That's not survival. That's control." Lucas looked back at the maze. It was never about control. It was about rhythm. "Exactly," Jex said, "and rhythm can't be taught." The silence that followed was less tense now. There was a quiet acknowledgement in it, a recognition that something had shifted, not just in the outcome of the trial, but in the professor's understanding. Jex broke the silence again. "There's something else. After your first rescue, you delayed your beacon activation." "Yes," Lucas confirmed. "The rules didn't say I couldn't." "No," Jex agreed. "They didn't. But most cadets would have locked in the moment they arrived." Lucas shrugged. "Reaching the goal doesn't matter if others are still dying." The professor studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "You'll be transferred." Lucas's brow furrowed. "Transferred?" "To the Polaris Initiative," Jex said. "Command-level training, planetary operations. They've been watching. This test was part of your evaluation." Lucas didn't answer. The information sank into him slowly, like the warmth in his muscles. "You'll leave in 2 days," Jex continued. "Until then, you're free to rest. Your gear will be cleaned, your blades are to be submitted for analysis." Lucas smiled faintly. "Don't dull them. Took me months to tune the curvature." "No promises," Jex said, almost dryly. "Now go. Your shuttle is ready." Lucas turned to leave but paused at the doorway. He looked back at the shimmering maze one last time, watching as the final drones recovered the last of the injured students. He saw the paths he had taken, traced now only in memory, and the marks he had left behind, already starting to fade with the next shift in the ice. Then he walked away. Behind him, the beacon pulsed one last time, and the maze began to fold in on itself, vanishing beneath the frost as if it had never existed. 2 days passed in silence. Lucas spent them alone in a compact dorm module perched on the edge of the Academy's polar training station. Outside his window stretched the vast white expanse of Zarthus 9, now dormant, the ice maze buried beneath miles of snowfall. The beacon no longer pulsed. Its energy had been redirected into the planetary grid, and its purpose, for now, had been fulfilled. He watched the horizon often, not out of nostalgia, but with a quiet sense of closure. He had come here to complete a challenge. He had left with something far greater. Inside the room, he had little to distract himself. His skates had been taken for analysis by the Academy's tech division, though he'd insisted they not alter the curvature. His uniform had been replaced by the standard-issue travel gear used for Polaris cadets. Matte black fabric, lightweight, pressure-sealed, with a discreet insignia on the left shoulder. He ran his fingers over the insignia as he stood in front of the mirror that morning, brushing his hand once across the cloth. The emblem shimmered silver in the light, shaped like the Polaris constellation crossed with a sword. At precisely 600, his door chimed. He opened it to find a shuttle pilot standing at attention. She was tall, Carsian, with a face lined by blue tattoos and a voice clipped by discipline. "Cadet Grant," she said, "your transport is waiting. Follow me." He nodded without a word and stepped out into the corridor. The walk to the launch pad was quiet. Only the sound of his boots echoed against the metal floor. There were no farewells, no instructors stood waiting, no students lined the halls to witness his departure. That was the way the Academy worked. Excellence was not celebrated, it was expected. And yet, as the hatch to the shuttle opened and he stepped inside, Lucas paused. One person was waiting. Valera stood at the edge of the interior walkway, leaning slightly on a support rail. Her suit had been replaced with civilian robes, and her claws were wrapped in healing mesh. She straightened as he entered, the silver of her eyes meeting his with steady focus. "Still moving like the ice owes you something," she said softly. Lucas smiled faintly. "Still breathing. Guess I won't complain." She stepped forward, something in her expression shifting from guarded to genuine. "I heard what happened. With Halrex. And with the maze. I don't know if I would have survived without you." "You would have," he said. "Just maybe not that day." There was a pause, and then she reached out one clawed hand and placed it gently on his shoulder. "The Polaris Initiative is watching. Don't forget who you are when they start telling you who to become." Lucas met her gaze and gave a single firm nod. Then he stepped past her and took his seat in the passenger hold. The hatch sealed shut with a hiss, and the engines whirred to life. The shuttle lifted off in silence, curving away from the icy surface, the Academy shrinking to a dot behind them. Within minutes, they broke through the moon's stratosphere, and the vast ocean of stars opened before them. Lucas sat quietly, strapped into his seat, watching the void through the observation panel. He wasn't thinking about medals, missions, or promotions. He was thinking about something smaller. His first winter back on Earth. The way frozen ponds shimmered under lamplight, the scrape of borrowed skates on real ice, the sound of his breath catching in his lungs as he learned to fall and stand again. That rhythm had followed him across light years, and it had saved lives. Several hours later, the shuttle docked with the Polaris flagship Valiant Star. Its hull was the size of a city, lined with orbital platforms and shield arrays. Inside, the atmosphere shifted from cold institutional steel to cutting-edge efficiency. Lucas was met by an escort officer, a woman in a command uniform, who saluted him as if he had already earned his place. He was brought to the induction deck where a long hall displayed the names of every Polaris graduate who had led planetary missions, brokered peace on fractured worlds, or faced the dark void of uncharted systems. There were thousands of names. Some glowed brighter than others, legends whose stories had spread across star systems. At the far end of the hall was a blank panel. Lucas stared at it for a long time, then turned as the officer spoke. "This is your starting point. You'll train, lead, and if you survive long enough, your name may be etched there too." He gave a simple nod and followed her into the heart of the training wing. Months passed. The days were grueling. Simulations, strategy modules, zero-G combat, diplomacy under pressure. Polaris cadets were forged in every discipline. Lucas didn't excel at everything, but what he touched he mastered with patience. When it came to planetary recon, he quickly surpassed every metric. When it came to empathy, an unpredictable but crucial variable, he became the standard. Other cadets began to refer to him by nickname. Some called him Glide for how he moved through simulations like a shadow on wind. Others called him Maze Ghost. He never cared for either. He just worked, quietly, steadily, like someone skating alone across a lake. His final test at Polaris came not in the form of combat or calculation, but leadership. An artificial crisis was initiated on a simulated colony under threat. He was tasked with saving as many as possible while managing panic, resistance, and limited resources. While others barked orders or froze under pressure, Lucas walked into the chaos, found the rhythm, and moved with it. He didn't save everyone. That wasn't the test. He saved the right ones, at the right time, without losing himself. When the simulation ended, the command board did not debrief him with praise. They simply moved his name onto the official roster. Lucas Grant, Polaris Initiative, active command, and that was enough. Years later, long after his missions became classified and his name known beyond Polaris stations, a student asked him what made him different from the others. He thought for a moment and answered, "I never fought the ice, I just learned to skate."